Over the last year, Carvana has been like a car crash that you simply can't look away from. You wince when you look at it, but you just can't seem to look away. Scandal after scandal led to Carvana being banned from selling cars in some states, and some questionable business practices led the company to digging themselves into a massive hole of debt. The company hit their rock bottom around Christmas of last year when it was announced that Carvana debtors had reached a deal to have the best interest of the company in mind with debt negotiations if a bankruptcy was to occur, which is essentially an agreement saying that none of these debtors were going to run each other over for the sake of getting the best deal possible. They would all work together for the best interest of the company if a bankruptcy were to occur. On this news, Carvana stock tanked and it eventually became essentially a penny stock. But over the last 7 months, Carvana has had quite the pivot. Their earnings, while not amazing, have picked up, the stock is climbing, and just this week, Carvana reached a massive debt deal which would reduce Carvana's debt by more than $1 billion. And so in this video, I'm going to be breaking down what's going on with Carvana. I'm going to be talking about why Carvana is still a mess despite the fact that things may be turning in a positive direction, and I'm going to be breaking down whether or not Carvana is officially out of the woods in terms of bankruptcy. Now, I do want to preface all of this by saying this is kind of old news, at least older. And while I knew I wanted to make a video covering this topic, my sister had a baby the same day that this news broke, and as a result, it kind of threw off my entire filming schedule. In fact, here's a picture of me scripting this video while simultaneously watching my 7-day-old niece. So if you're wondering why it took me a week to make this video, that's why. Now, let's first address Q2 data, and then we'll move on to this debt deal. Carvana retail units sold totaled 76,530 units, a decrease of 35% year over year. Revenue totaled $2.968 billion, which was a decrease of 24% year over year. Total gross profit was $499 million, which was actually an increase of 26%. And total gross profit per unit, otherwise known as GPU, was $6,520, which was an increase of $3,152. Adjusted EBITDA earnings were at $155 million, which is quite the stark contrast compared to the previous 5 quarters where Carvana was in the red. But despite the positive adjusted EBITDA earnings, their net income was still down and in the red, with the company losing $105 million this quarter. Now, seeing a gross profit increase of 26% is no easy feat, and we have to give credit where credit is due. Carvana is making strides in the right direction, and whenever it comes to why and how Carvana made these improvements, they outlined that there were a few different reasons. Seasonality. Cars in general depreciate less in Q2. This resulted in Carvana being able to buy cars at wholesale or from customers and then sell those cars for a better price. Higher spreads between retail market price and wholesale acquisition price. For a long time, in fact for the second half of 2021 and for the most part of 2022, the difference between wholesale prices and retail prices weren't really that different. As a result, as dealerships bought cars at wholesale, they didn't really have a great margin whenever they then sold that car to a customer. This has actually been a pretty big problem in the automotive industry for a while now, but it does seem as though the tides are beginning to turn because this margin is widening. You can now buy wholesale cars at a much better price, sell that to the customer for a much higher price, which results in more profit for the dealership. That's what Carvana means whenever they say that there is a higher spread. Another massive factor is the selling of some significant loans. This is an important part of Carvana's business model, and it's something that they've been doing for a long time, though it isn't exclusive to Carvana, and it is extremely common in the automotive industry as a whole. And this is the business of originating and selling loans. Let's say, for example, there's a dealership that sells and finances 100 cars, and the total finance amount for those 100 cars totals out to $100,000. Sure, this dealership could hold on to this $100,000 in loans, and they're able to then make money off of that interest, but there is an inherent risk associated with doing so. Because if the people who took out these loans end up defaulting on these loans, then it leaves the dealership holding the bag. So what dealerships will do in this instance in order to offload liability is they will simply sell that debt to a debt investor. So rather than holding on to this $100,000, they'll sell it, and that debt investor can now make money off of that interest. This is extremely common, and Carvana is just one of the many different companies that do this. Last quarter, Carvana sold more loans than they originated, meaning Carvana sold more debt to debt investors than they originated and held themselves. Selling debt is a revenue stream, holding on to debt is a liability. This was particularly a pretty big problem for Carvana around this time last year, because around this time, they were actually originating and holding on to more loans than they were actually selling. And this left the company in a pretty bad spot liability-wise. But Carvana has now taken a turn. They've sold more debt than they took on, and as a result, their profit per unit ended up increasing. As you can see, retail units sold is down, GPU is up, which is what we were just talking about, net income is down, and you can see here liabilities are down over the last 6 months, which is due to them selling this debt. So in conclusion, profit is up, but vehicle sales are down quite a bit. Now let's move on to the debt deal. Last week, Carvana announced that they had entered a plea deal with creditors to cut debt by $1.2 billion. According to Automotive News, the agreement signed with the group of note holders will eliminate more than 83% of its unsecured notes maturing in 2025 and 2027 and lower required cash interest expense by over $430 million per year for the next 2 years. The unsecured notes in the restructuring agreement are being swapped for 3 new classes of secured debt, which are higher up in the repayment line as they're backed by Carvana and ADESA assets. Now, the previous loans that were involved in this restructuring were unsecured, meaning that if Carvana didn't pay, there were limited repercussions that these debtors could take. Now, an unsecured debt is something like in most cases a credit card. If you don't pay a credit card back, there's nothing really the credit card company can do other than sue you in order to get that fund, but they can't take your house or take your car. A secured debt, on the other hand, is something where there is collateral put up for that debt. A mortgage is a perfect example of this. So if somebody defaults on a secured loan, then the bank will simply take the house or the car or whatever is associated with that loan. And so because this new debt that's outlined in this restructuring plan is now secured with ADESA and Carvana assets, it means that Carvana and ADESA have a lot more to lose if these debts go unpaid. This is most likely the reason why these debtors ended up coming to this agreement in the first place, because they knew that if Carvana ends up filing for bankruptcy, they're not going to collect anything. Whereas now there is a little bit more of an obligation to pay, which is a big advantage for these debtors. And truthfully, this is good news for Carvana as well. This allows for Carvana to get a hold on their expenses, which have been soaring since the pandemic. It strengthens Carvana financially, lowers their expenses, and absolutely increases their chance of survival. But what I'm wondering, is this a temporary patch that's getting placed on a sinking ship? At the end of the day, Carvana has a sustainability issue, and while this is definitely going to help in creating the sustainability that Carvana needs, it certainly doesn't solve the problem at hand. It just slows down the flame that is a massive amount of debt that's becoming due very quickly. And truthfully, I'm really interested to see how Carvana addresses these sustainability issues in a declining car market. Profit margin for retailers is decreasing across the board, market demand is also decreasing, and even veteran dealership groups in this space like AutoNation and Asbury have been seeing disappointing vehicle sales data. Now, I don't want to be that YouTuber that simply always craps on a company and never acknowledges whenever they've done something right. I've been a big critic on Carvana, but even I have to admit that this debt deal is good news. Carvana's earnings were better than expected, and things do look as though they're improving. And while these factors certainly do increase Carvana's chance of survival, I certainly don't think the company is in the clear either. And Carvana has a long road ahead of them until the risk of bankruptcy is permanently in their rearview mirror. But like always, you guys, I hope that you enjoyed this video. If you have any questions, comments, if you have anything to add, I would love to hear it, so make sure to leave a comment down below. And while you guys are at it, make sure to hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and hit the notification bell, and I will see you guys in the next video.